It is wonderful to see you back at the end of a long day. I hope you have had good conversations today. It is my great honor, privilege, to introduce Safiya Noble, one of my heroes and my friend. Safiya is the David O. Sears Presidential Endowed Chair of Social Sciences and professor at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. She is director of the Center on Resilience and Digital Justice, we'll come back to that word, and co-director of the Minderoo Initiative on Tech and Power. She currently serves as director of the UCLA DataX initiative. She is, among many other things, the author of the award-winning book, Algorithms of Oppression, How Search Engines Reinforce Racism. And in 2021, she was recognized as a MacArthur Foundation Fellow, that's sometimes known as the Genius Award, for her groundbreaking work on algorithmic discrimination. Safiya.
Hi, Gina.
How you doing?
I'm okay.
You know, there has been quite a bit that has happened in the higher ed sector over the last few years in the United States. My longtime collaborator is an assistant dean at the University of Washington. And the conversations that she's been privy to over the last 3 weeks are shattering, right? They're shocking. That the idea that the second, one of the country's most important schools of public health is literally talking about shutting its doors because of the sheer amount of work they were doing in collaboration with USAID. So there may soon no longer be a University of Washington School of Public Health, maybe gone. The second thing is the conversations around, this is a very technocratic thing, but I think that's something, the pretense of what we're going to talk about today in our conversation. How student loans are managed in the United States. This is being toyed with. It's a $1.6 trillion portfolio in federally managed student loans. That's not all tax money, but the federal government helps to process those promissory notes. $1.6 trillion in the portfolio. And a recent executive order just said, well, we're just going to move it, right? We're going to move it from this department to that department. We're going to do this thing. So the University of Washington has gamed what this might look like if there's a problem with those disbursements. And I'll tell you, I can't speak for them. I can't speak for those conversations are happening now. What if the federal government misses a student loan payment? Remember, $1.6 trillion injection into the US economy through students and their families. That doesn't, university can't exist for a year without those payments. They might not be able to exist a single term without those payments. That's the kind of precarity of the conversations that are happening in those universities that are in the league tables of the same league of Oxford and Cambridge. Yeah. I mean, it's unfathomable, I think, in this country.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that is so elusive, even to people in the United States, but certainly for people outside of the United States. So you hear these things like, the Department of Government Efficiency, I can barely say it without laughing, DOGE, led by Elon Musk, is here to create these kinds of bureaucratic efficiencies. And, nothing could be further from the truth, because actually the project is about dismantling higher education, dismantling K through 12 education, dismantling Medicare, Social Security, everything that we consider to be, let's say, the public goods of a democracy that keep people alive and keep people educated. This is the project of that office, is to, in fact, facilitate the dismantling of these institutions. And I think that is something that is really just not widely understood, because speaking of misinformation, people are kind of flooded with a lot of propaganda right now. And conflating this idea of market efficiencies with the project of the administration, when I think the project of the administration is much darker. It's much more sinister. It's led by the kind of neo-reactionary leaders. It's influenced by right-wing thinkers like Curtis Yarvin and their acolytes. That project is actually about installing a monarch CEO, dismantling democracy. So it's interesting to me when we're here talking about things like AI in a generic way, without talking about the backers, the billionaire backers, the Mark Andreessens, the Peter Thiels, the Elon Musk, and what their project is actually about, which is facilitating transfers of wealth from the public sector into their own private hands. It's more of a battle between the corporatist, people interested in the kind of corporatization and that type of stability, market stability, versus oligarchs. And we need to be more, I think, forthright about these dimensions of the threats that are on the table. Many people, again, in this room and beyond this room, have been talking about the threats of big tech to society. But I think many times that is in the register of, let's say, just harmful technologies or technologies that can discriminate. And, I was certainly talking about that years ago in my own work, but that was as a demonstration or as an opening into talking about what does it mean when you have a sector of society, billionaire titans on the right who are really invested in these kinds of dismantling projects and who have monopoly power and have concentrated it and now have taken over the apparatus of the state in the United States. And that actually is happening not just in the United States. It's, we could say, I don't know, don't boo me, but we could say that maybe Brexit was a little bit of a opportunity to a signal that something was amiss prior to the 2016 election in the United States. And the playbooks that are coming out of Russia and other places that are deeply invested in the dismantling of the United States are rolling out. I feel like I'm saying everything. I opened this by saying I wasn't going to say anything because we're being recorded, and now I'm just like saying everything. So this will be the recording that gets me disappeared. I don't know. So it's weird to even imagine that we don't have the kind of speech that we had just 3 months ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if we're in a project of AI and the automated state, if the project of AI and the automated state is one that is about control,
yes,
we can absolutely say Black women warned us.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And others.
And others.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think my time as a student, my time as a professor, my time as a scholar, I have been reading women who have been vocal and maybe not listened to. Certainly there are a lot of Black women also. We were part of that conversation of trying to issue warnings, mostly because we are part of communities that are openly targeted with racism and sexism and harmful anti-democratic, anti-civil rights policies. So we are closer to the site of where, as are LGBTQ scholars and journalists too. And I think that when you are in those crosshairs, you see things differently. At the time that I was starting this work, maybe, 15 years ago, you couldn't even argue openly that an algorithm could discriminate because just, first of all, algorithm was not part of our everyday vernacular. It was jargon that was really used by computer scientists and information scientists. And you certainly, we were in a climate where people talked about algorithms and technology as purely math, right? And so much harder to anchor this idea that technology is a social practice. It's political, it's economic, it's social, it's mathematical. But there was a much more reductionist way, I think, of talking about it that I was less interested in talking about. And then, of course, my other Black women colleagues who are paying different prices. Also, I think of my our friend Dr. Tanit Jabru, who's was fired from Google for raising the alarm, along with our colleagues from the University of Washington, Emily Bender and others, Margaret Mitchell, Schmargaret Schmitchell, to be precise in that paper. Writing about what large language models would do to the environment and do to our society, and the kinds of just discrimination baked into these technologies. And, again, just asking questions in different places, looking at different people. And I think that's very important for all of our work, is to get specific and granular. I really loved, Zizi, your, opening remarks and the idea of like AI as an open signifier. I mean, I think a lot of us are going to take that away from these meetings because it's not helpful to have an open signifier that we can't get specific around, that we can't talk about labor, we can't talk about harm, we can't talk about economies, we can't talk about concentrated power, anti-democratic tendencies and goals. So yeah, I think, Black women, we have been unfortunately in the crosshairs of a lot of anti-democratic. I mean, well, I wore my Kamala suit today and I didn't even mean to, but that's
I've got my Kamala trainers.
I see it. We're like a good combo right now. So, there's, in some ways, the last election in the United States really represented, in many ways, like, the crystallization of when Black women speak and openly tell us what the project of Project 2025 and the opposition would be. No one believed her. So we have a lot of learning still to do.
So if we're in this battle of the billionaires,
We are.
what do we do?
Well, we have the billionaires on the right who are well organized and kind of hate each other too. It's interesting. I mean, it's not like they're all lined up together, but one of the things that happens in the U.S. And beyond with the billionaires is they throw a lot of money at every possible terrible idea just to see which ones will stick. And there's just no shortage of dark money and other types of money that will go to trying out anything. And I think we have, in the more centrist and left kinds of well-heeled billionaires, there's such a surgical kind of approach that's requires all kinds of study and evidence to make sure we're going down exactly the right path. Like there's a much less willingness, I think, on the part of those kinds of that class of people to try everything to protect democracy and civil rights and human rights. And so that's been, if we're in a moment where we're in the kind of like battle of the billionaires, these titans, I think we need the ones who fund our kind of work to get really dialed in much more quickly. And we saw this right after the election. Many of the major foundations in the United States kind of went dark and stopped funding people. There was kind of this vacuum of communication that jeopardized a lot of people. Obviously, we've all seen our colleagues who've been losing their centers and been losing their work, compounded by the loss of USAID money for sure. We understand why. I mean, certainly the administration has declared some of these people, threats to society. And we know like the massive drive to weaponize the IRS and other kinds of institutions against them is real. Attempts to, we can see to freeze assets and those kinds of things. But, this is not the time for people to retreat and withhold resources, in my opinion. when you think about that, the University of Washington, that a whole school within it could go down in a quarter. Places like UCLA and the University of California system, we are also exceedingly vulnerable. And, it's kind of shocking to believe that we are that we live in a society where there have been such great transfers of wealth that we have billionaires. I mean, this is like the thought of a billionaire. I mean, when I was a kid, is just impossible to conceptualize.
And perhaps soon a trillionaire.
I rebuke it, okay? But perhaps we know he aspires to that. But that can only happen through just, these continued massive grifts against the public. And a massive reorganization of our society that to some degree we buy into. And this is where, again, the conversations at the intersection of technology and society are so incredibly important. Like, to me, I can't imagine waking up every day and not talking about those things, because I think that we are in many of the wrong registers in these conversations where we're kind of like, and this is no shade, it's just, for me, I find it untenable to think about the granular dimensions of, can we debias a data set, when we have these other more profound structural changes happening that are so profoundly anti-democratic, that to talk about the technology without talking about the democracy or beyond or better, which I appreciate so much, just seems nonsensical. So I think that's a thing that we have to keep at the forefront of our conversations about tech right now.
The larger political project. The larger project
the context,
is political.
Absolutely, because the conversations right now that are so crystallized in my mind, because I live in Los Angeles, are the ways that, for example, artists and writers and scholars included are thinking about AI's encroachment upon their labor. The incredible visibility that we have now and have had for a decade about and in part due to Sarah Roberts' work around content moderation, Tim Neat's interviewing of data cleaners in Kenya, and all of the kinds of, Christina's work in organizing tech labor and other kinds of labor organizing. Those are the places where we have so much possibility to talk about what we will lose in our quality of life, in the sense of personal prosperity, personal, actualization. To me, it's too much focus on AI, less focus on people and what these things are doing to upend our lives. And it's not interesting to me to talk about anybody in here who's got a child, who's watched their child sucked into the abyss of the internet. Anybody who's had a relative they love right-wing radicalized on the internet, on Facebook, on YouTube. Anybody who's just been why am I tethered to my device 24/7, right? All of these granular dimensions of how life has changed are really important, because we are, I think, radically altering the fabric of what it means to be human and what it means to live in society and live in community with each other. And that is such a more interesting conversation to me than talking about just the tech.
And this is my cueing your questions. So be thinking about your questions. So there's two ways I want to ask this next question. And the way, kind of rationally, I want to ask it is, where is there hope? But the pit of my stomach wants to ask you, Safiya, is America lost?
Well, first of all, I mean, if you ask any Black person that, the answer is unequivocally yes. Like, I mean, and you can ask that of any generation, past or present. Of course, you can't have a country that's predicated on, enslavement and colonization, all of the things we have not reconciled. You cannot be lost without, some type of recognition and course correcting. We've only had about 60 years of civil rights laws on the books. That's one generation. My generation is the first generation to grow up, Gen X, under equal protection under the law, and that is actively being rolled back right now. And I'm older, but I'm not that old. It's a lot of hair dye. So, are we lost? Certainly, no question. Should we be hopeful? We must. I mean, for many of us, we don't have any other choice. Like, there's no circumstances under which we are going to not fight these things. And, for many of us who come from communities that have, many kinds of communities in the United States and here in Europe that have lived under attack, it's in our, it's in us to resist these things and to struggle for something better. And there's no way to not do that. So to me, that's like incredibly hopeful. I wake up hopeful all the time. Now, is my timeline around that hope longer than I thought? Yeah, because we're drinking like poop in the water, you guys. Like they're doing away with the Environmental Protection Agency. The poop is in the water, okay? So I'm just saying it's really intense. Now, my girlfriend from Chile told me she lived through the revolution and that they survived the poop in the water. But I'm just saying that we must be hopeful that it will get better, and we have a lot of work to do, and we can't afford to not be having the hard conversations together to get through it together too.
I have 2 words for you. Thames water. I wanted that reaction. Yeah, we've got poop in the water here too. And we have a Labor government. But we have, there are serious problems that need to be solved. Again, I'm going to come back to, we absolutely have to deliver for democracy, and we have to build something. We have to build towards a future.
Absolutely. We must be able to imagine the worlds we want. Now that, to me, is our superpower. And what AI can't do is, it doesn't have a soul. It doesn't have the kind of animating spirit that we have. And I feel that our ability to imagine the worlds we want and even raise up the tech we want is still before us. And we have to figure out how to resource that, but we will.
We need people to lean into that project. Who's going to start us?
What are we missing? What should journalists who cover tech be talking about that they're not talking about?
Okay.
That's what I really want to know from you.
I think you should be watching what's happening to the lawyers. Because, under Marcos, it was more lawyers that were harmed and jailed than anyone. And I think that we sometimes forget that this complete erosion of the rule of law is going to be that will be the linchpin in systemic change that will be hard to come back from. I'm not sure that's really being carefully covered enough, in a way that people can understand what's at stake if, court orders are ignored and those kinds of things, or you can't go to court for enforcement of your rights. So many people feel, and especially in our sector, in the tech and society sector, we're already at odds because individuals can't really sue big companies and effectively win. So we're already victimized, and we're in such a victimized position as a public in relationship to all kinds of companies, not just in the tech sector, that people don't even feel that's a viable channel for them to have recourse. But that is, that has to be nuanced as well in terms of what happens if Congress and the judiciary in the United States just become, well, the neo-reactionaries call it like decorative, I think it's like a decorative engagement that the executive branch might have with them. And a total power by one branch in the U.S. again is really that's just a radical departure. Now, the other part of it is for those of us who have lived already under disenfranchisement in the United States, it's hard to suss out how is this that much different than any other rights violation that my community lives under, right? Whether it's for my community, for Black people, it's racial profiling, predictive policing, all kinds of, school to prison pipeline, all the kinds of egregious systems that have already been designed for our demise. It's hard to have conversations about democracy because it's like democracy already isn't really serving us in totality. And that goes really to the prior question about, democracy in the Democratic Party. People experience so many system failures that democracy is an illusion. And it's just a word that we have to make really clear what the stakes are over and over and over and over again, and what the potential for remedies are. And I just think that and of course, if you make it, if you wipe out the lawyers who are our civil rights lawyers are under, and human rights lawyers are under incredible pressure right now. I think that's just a thing to keep our eyes on.
I will circle back to Tressie Cottom, who also gives wisdom in terms of what Democrats get right and wrong. And if you aren't reading Tressie, I would highly recommend. But she says something I think very clear, resonates with me coming from what is now Trump country in eastern Kentucky. Trump had a very simple message. Oh, I said the word. Trump had a very simple message. The world is a dangerous place. I will take care of you. The world's a bad place. I will take care of you. That's a hard message to defeat. And that's, I think, something that will propel us in this conversation. How do we think about the messages of things? Our plans have plans, but our plans are not translating in terms of what we do for that imagining the hope and the kind of better futures that we want to imagine.
Yeah, I would just say it's really, in the U.S. context, I don't think, let's say my grandparents' generation fought fascism in a different part of the world that was not necessarily, although if you want to say fighting the Klan, then we could say fighting fascism, fighting like Nazis in your neighborhood. Okay, that's fighting fascism. But there's a loss of vocabulary too, or let's say a wrangling with vocabulary and understanding what this moment is. When you are a generation that does worse than the generation before you, and your kids' generation is going to do worse than you, and their kids' generation is going to do worse, then people lose track of how did we get here over time. And I think, again, this, we don't have in the popular speech, like in lay speech, it's hard to critique capitalism. It's just it's not available in the US the way it is in countries that have a strong social welfare state. We can't even get single payer health insurance in the United States, right? So I think this is part of the challenge is, we live under a lot of mythologies, like pulling oneself up by their bootstraps and being a self-made person, and these things that are completely a farce. And at the same time, as we watch the rich get richer, people just project their own aspirations onto that. Well, maybe I could be an Elon Musk, right? Rather than asking, what the hell is that? And why do we have that? So I think this is also part of our work as scholars and as journalists and communicators, is to create vocabularies and language and to narrate, you know, what capitalism is doing, what fascism is doing, what these anti-democratic kinds of tendencies are, and make that legible so that people aren't vulnerable to the Messiah complex that you're describing of needing a savior.
And that's also, I think, something for us to underscore in our conversations here in the UK. We're not wholly immune. And in the title of a famous book, you know, it could happen here. We have our own anti-democratic forces to contend with in the UK. I'm going to have to put a pause on the conversation for now. But before you join me in thanking Safiya for this really insightful, helpful, and I think ultimately hopeful conversation, I have a few logistics points for you. So please, bear with me. 2 minutes. One, those of you who have received a confirmation for dinner, let us please meet at Magdalen College, the dining hall, the famous hall, at 7:15 for 7:30. It says 7:30 in our program. We need to be seated by 7:30, please, if we can. Second, those of you joining us tomorrow, please, we are 9 for 9:30. I'm throwing so many Cambridge things at you. We are 9 for 9:30. So again, come for 9, have coffee, have pastries, have time to meet and connect with one another, and we will start another fascinating conversation with Audrey Tang tomorrow morning at 9:30. Will you please join me in thanking Safiya Noble?